My name is Jim Knight. I am a lord, which is why it says what it says back there. But someone just asked me how come, which is a fair question. I wasn't born into it. I was a minister in the Blair-Brown governments for 5 years, 3 years of which as an education minister, which has begun my 10-year love affair with this sector, and I hope that that love affair goes on for a very long time to come. And I am now the Chief Education Advisor for TES Global, who are the company that own the THE, and we're massively proud of this event and our association with all of you. And I'm joined here by Ryan Craig, who will briefly tell you a bit about himself so that I don't have to remember it.
Super. So I'm Ryan Craig. I'm managing director of a firm called University Ventures. We are a private equity firm that invests in higher education, primarily in the US, but also globally. And I had a book that came out last year called The Great Unbundling of Higher Education, and hence this presentation.
Good. And we're going to do this as a bit of a conversation, but with some slides, which may or may not be unbundled in the process. So, Ryan, do you want to start off by just telling us a little bit about what the early warning signs are that something is going on that this audience should worry about?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I want to do is just establish this premise. And this is a little bit absurd. Hopefully it will get your attention post-lunch. On the island of Yap in the South Pacific, the currency they use is this giant stone coin. And it's kind of unwieldy. You know, you try to pick it up, you don't necessarily succeed. You probably won't. In the same way, the currency that we currently utilize in the labor market is also an unwieldy currency. It's the degree. A degree that, at least at the undergraduate level in this country, takes 4 years, and at least in this country, that almost half of students who undertake it fail to complete. So it's unwieldy, and it's a bundle. And I'll talk about unbundling in a moment, but I think some of the challenges that we have are actually not due to changes in higher education, but rather changes in hiring and how employers hire. So bear with me for just a minute as I explain this. So in the past 15 years, we've gone from a non-digital to a digital hiring ecosystem. And what that means is that something like 85% of all jobs that are available are posted online. And those jobs that are posted online typically generate 200, 300 applicants for each position. Employers are trying to manage being inundated by applicants. Applicants, the vast majority of whom look fairly indistinguishable in terms of their credentials. They all have bachelor's degrees. For many positions, they all have master's degrees. Very difficult to differentiate. And so, you have employers who are just not happy with the current, and you have all sorts of signs that are indicating that employers are not satisfied with the status quo. Google has come out and said they're no longer hiring based on degrees. They think degrees are not a good indicator of whether talent is appropriate, and they're deploying their own assessments and tests and projects on their candidate pool to ascertain who they actually want to bring further and potentially hire.
And did they go on a journey to do that? So I remember a few years ago sharing a platform with a senior person from Google who said we're a graduate-only employer, and I guess they could go to the best ranked graduate schools and get those with the best scores, and why wouldn't they just do that?
Well, and they do. They do. And the reality is that my guess is probably 90% of new hires from Google continue to have traditional credentials, but only because the caliber of the inputs of those candidates is already so high, and they're going through the traditional path as it is. But some significant number, Google, for example, has hired candidates who come out of Udacity's nano degree programs at this point. So we're beginning to see early signs. Penguin Random House in the UK has come out and said that degrees are no longer a prerequisite for entry-level positions at that publisher. PricewaterhouseCoopers in the UK has done the same thing, and interestingly, Ernst & Young in the UK has come out and said they actually are going to be masking whether or not candidates have degrees from their hiring managers, because they feel it's a false, if not misleading, indicator of whether or not a candidate will perform in the job.
So the UK is a dangerous hotbed of subversive hiring.
They are, and I'd make the point that, you know, if these kinds of brand name employers who really ought to have their pick of talent aren't satisfied, what about the non-brand name employers? Our sense from talking to many of them is that there's a real dissatisfaction at the quality of talent supplied by our current higher education ecosystem, and specifically their ability to differentiate amongst credentials and candidates. And we think that is in large part why we have this gap that is so widely reported, the skills gap, the gap between degrees and employment, with a minority of students at the time of graduation having job offers, and something, you know, certainly in this country after the recession, 50, 60, 70% of graduates were unemployed or underemployed after graduation. And you have employers who are thinking that these graduates just do not have the competencies that their businesses need.
And is student debt and sort of a return on investment debates that might go on internally in an individual student's mind a part of that?
Yes, I think, again, we're not seeing huge enrollment shifts yet at this point. We're going to talk about where the shifts are going to start, but certainly that is adding fuel to the fire, for sure.
It'll be, I mean, I know there are one or two glorious exceptions around tuition fees. Germany is a notable example. It'll be interesting, perhaps in discussion shortly, whether this is a pattern that people are seeing elsewhere in the world.
I would love to know. We focus primarily on the U.S.
So, I still really like buying music albums. You know, I was watching something on TV recently, and I heard a band I'd never heard before play some music I liked, and I just bought the whole album. But maybe, yeah, am I just weird?
That's not the way most people buy music these days.
Okay.
Let's put it this way. This is the book that came out last year, and you know the punchline of the book. Now you don't have to buy it. Is that music has been unbundled, except for some music lovers. Television in this country is in the process of being unbundled. We're now able to buy over the top, buy network, buy program, as opposed to subscribing to the full bundle, the premium tier, the basic tier, the way that we used to buy television. From a microeconomic standpoint, unbundling shifts surplus from the producer to the consumer. So it's been a benefit. It's really been what's kept this sector healthy and growing for 50, 60, 70 years. And a bachelor's degree or a master's degree is a bundle. You think about what's required. It's 120 credits in this country, or 45 credits, or whatever the requirement is, of lots of different things. And we bundle lots of different products and services into that bundle in return for a large sticker price. So that is a bundle. So the question is, what might prompt the unbundling, and what does that look like? So first of all, you know, an unbundled market would be a market of competencies, or what we call a competency marketplace. You know, you have here's the shape. You have individuals, employers, and educational providers or universities, and they're trading in competencies. And now competencies, it's sort of hard to get our heads around. What is it? You know, how do we define them? How do we describe them? They're ineffable. And my point is that the gap between higher education and the labor market that's existed from time immemorial is a data gap. And it's a data gap that the technology is in the process of solving. All the data around all the different axes of this triangle is now available. Data on individuals' competencies, data on job descriptions and job requirements and the competencies required by employers, and also data on what specific educational programs are imparting in terms of competencies. Now, it doesn't mesh neatly. It's not neatly. There's not a clear taxonomy for doing it, but we've used algorithms and big data technology in other fields to address similar data problems. And there are lots of people at lots of for-profits and not-for-profit enterprises who are working on this, including at LinkedIn, for example. So if you can to visualize a competency marketplace, visualize your LinkedIn profile where it's not simply your resume, but actually a machine-generated iteration of hundreds of competencies and levels that you've achieved. And what that provides is the basis for essentially a human capital GPS for you, where you're able to ascertain where you are relative to potential positions, jobs, careers you might want, and where there are gaps, as there will be, what the optimal or most efficient pathway, educational pathway will be to remediate the majority of those gaps, which is, again, not to say that it's immediately visible to the user, but what it will be is visible to a machine or an algorithm that might be keeping you from an employer or connecting you to an employer.
So you're kind of saying that employers sift on the basis of qualification as a proxy for competence, and if they can now start to sift on the basis of competence itself, then qualification is less relevant, and that's the foundation upon which we built education.
Yes, that's exactly right. I sort of fast-forwarded through this slide, but what you see here is, we currently have a degree or pedigree-based filtering system. And what a competency-based filtering will allow us to do. So in the current degree or pedigree-based filtering system, you have hundreds of applications for every position, and those applications are filtered through to candidates on the basis of a keyword-based applicant tracking system filter, which provides, it's a very poor filter. There are very few. Yeah.
So if we unbundle that,
Yeah.
and as a Brit, it feels like the US system is much more unbundled than the British one, in that you at least have credits and you have the ability to mix some courses up as part of your degree. But if we move to that unbundled system, what does that look like? It looks like someone just taking a course here and a course there, getting a job, then doing a course here, and then getting a different job. Is that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think at the end of the day, your GPS will provide you with suggestions as to what the optimal pathway is. And I think for very few people, will that optimal pathway be a 3 or 4 year bundle or degree in terms of value for money. More likely, what it looks like is, at least for a secondary school leaver thinking about tertiary education, it looks more like a 12 to 18 month initial pathway, which is not only skill specific, but also provides sort of many of those.
If I'm about to be operated on by a surgeon,
Right.
I want the surgeon to have at least one degree.
Yeah. And they will. Licensed fields that require professional licensure will be the last ones to be unbundled, and may never be. It will depend on the professional associations and their willingness to relax requirements.
So it's just all these waffy degrees that were made up in the first place. We're just going to get rid of those, is that it?
Well, I think we're going to have shorter pathways, and there'll be more of them, right? So, we're going to, the way we buy higher education today, for anyone who's been in the business of, or has had experience buying enterprise software, you'll know that it's a headache, and you'll know that you spend a lot of money to buy one big package one time, hopefully, and then you implement it. That's the way we buy higher education today. It's a one-time purchase. You buy it, you spend a lot of money for it. You don't use most of it, and typically enterprise software customers are unhappy with their purchase, as opposed to how we buy software today, increasingly, which is SaaS, which means you buy what you need when you need it. So what this means is we go from a one-time purchase to really a sort of a lifetime customer, which is the opportunity for universities in here, is to develop a relationship, a lifetime relationship with their students if they can own that student's competency profile, track their professional progress, and then begin to suggest learning opportunities and additional pathways for them.
But isn't there potentially, aren't you just being too logical? And couldn't it be that a lot of the reason why people want degrees is that there's a rites of passage thing? I walked here past a lot of frat houses, and maybe I thought they probably were because they had Greek symbols. And I've never been in a frat house. I don't know what goes on there. But I've seen films that.
Yeah.
There's a rite of passage thing about university?
There is.
We all want to hang on to.
And many of those campuses that support sort of healthy, vibrant, immersive campus environments will continue. So really what I'm talking about is the 2/3 or 3/4 of universities, at least in this country, who don't provide that, who are providing where students don't live on campus, don't have that immersive residential experience, and in most cases aren't completing. And so this is a better option for those students. I don't believe that the elite schools will be touched by this for an extended period of time. I think over time,
Everyone breathes a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
We all think we're elite, so we're all fine.
Well, but I think over time, though, employers, what's going to happen is employers will begin employing what are called people analytics, and which means they'll be able to sort of track the profile of candidates who they hire. And if candidate A comes in with a traditional credential, a degree, and candidate B comes in with a non-traditional background, and candidate B outperforms candidate A time and time again, I'm going to reflect that in my job description. Degrees are going to diminish in importance or perhaps fall out of the job description entirely. And in that case, some of our, the elite talent who might otherwise select an elite university and the bundled solution might opt for a different solution. And the smart ones will, right, in terms of value for money. So I think in time, it can't but affect elite universities. I can't put a finger on what that time frame is, but logic would suggest that they will be impacted in time.
And is there, because I've occasionally uttered these heretical thoughts to people in the UK, and they normally say, well, if you're right, what's the trigger point? Why isn't it happening now, or is something going to happen that will just trigger all of this?
Right. Well, I think one thing that's interesting is that we see the emergence. These are about 50 different companies that have emerged in this country in the last 2 or 3 years that are surfacing competencies beneath the level of the degree. So whether it's through e-portfolios or badges or gamification technology or short courses, they're providing students, before they earn that bundled credential, with the ability to showcase competencies to employers. And they all have the goal of making those competencies visible to employers in the existing hiring process, which means through their employers' applicant tracking systems. So as employers, we know employers are hungry for this data, and we know employers are not happy with the current keyword-based filtering that they're getting and trying to winnow down hundreds of applicants to a manageable set of candidates that a human hiring manager will look at. So we think that employers will begin looking at this data, and that schools and students who don't have this data available will be disadvantaged in the hiring process.
From the employers that I talk to, I kind of agree that they are impatient for something like this.
Yeah.
So what's the future going to look like?
I do think it looks like a series of shorter pathways for most people who are currently, if you will, blindly heading into to the bundled environment, where I'll come out of secondary school and I'll take a 12 to 18 month pathway, which is less expensive, and it's a clear pathway to my first job, probably in a specific sector or industry, but with an understanding that after working for a couple of years in that first job, there's a second pathway that's going to be expected of me if I want to move up or move laterally or become a manager. And that second pathway is going to be 12 to 18 months, and it's going to focus on those higher order thinking skills, critical thinking, managerial, executive function skills, and move on from there. And there will be multiple pathways, but the point is to move from a fairly uniform, monolithic credential to a multiplicity, a much more diverse credential environment.
So final question before we then open it up to people shouting, commenting, questioning
Throwing
from
things.
the audience. So let's just be fanciful for a moment. There's a board of management from an elite university here listening to you saying, okay, he's right, I'm going to appoint this guy as the next VC. What do you do?
Refuse the appointment, first of all. Secondly, I think two things. First is I would want to make sure that my current students, my current bundled, the customers of my current bundle have all the potential advantages possible in the labor market, which means doing many of these things in terms of giving them the ability to gather and showcase their individual competencies to employers by the time they complete their bundle. So they'll have a leg up in the labor market. So e-portfolios, badges, gamification, short project-based courses, virtual internships with employers. all these things to begin to develop that competency profile for my students. I would want to enable that.
And consciously cannibalizing your own business.
Well, so that's the second part, which is I would then simultaneously begin to look at developing those shorter, less expensive, industry-connected, in some cases even employer-connected pathways to jobs, which yes would cannibalize my current business. But that is, I think, where most universities will want to be, certainly in a decade, if not sooner.
Right. What do you think? So I have a question or a comment down here, but feel free to catch my eye.
Thank you for the presentation. Francisco Cantú, Tecnológico de Monterrey, Mexico. So the question is this. There are faculty members, professors at universities that think that the role of the university is to teach students to think, to be thinkers, to learn how to learn, rather than teaching them specific competencies. Although when they are looking for jobs, so employers look the other way around. They want them prepared to start the very next day to do their activities. So what is your position regarding this controversial discussion?
Yeah. So
do you agree with the faculty members?
I tend to agree with them, yeah. I do tend, yeah.
Okay, good.
So competence, I wish I had a slide that I didn't include here, but Lord Knight made me take it out for good reason. But the word competencies is sort of a dirty word in higher education. It tends to have a vocational, skill-based, almost blue-collar feel to it. That's not what I mean when I refer to competencies. Competencies is really anything that can be assessed, including critical thinking, problem-solving, executive function skills, higher-order thinking skills. So that's what I mean when I talk about it. And I think that these pathways that I'm referring to will do a lot in that they'll be more focused in terms of that competency development that they do. The second thing I would say to that is that one of the most remarkable changes that we've seen in this country in the last decade is the percentage of students who say that the reason they are entering higher education is employment and to get that first job. It's gone from 50% to 90%, and that's probably a result of the recession and almost certainly a result of the crisis of affordability that we have in this country, and may not be true globally, but is absolutely true here, and we can't ignore it. And I think higher education from time immemorial has taken the view, and I think a wonderful view, that what we're about is about getting students their fifth job rather than their first job. And I think that today's students don't necessarily buy that. They sort of have a sense that if you don't get a great first job, your fifth job ain't gonna be so good. And that's the people realize careers are path dependent. They've seen what's happened to this, the generation over the last 10 years, and they want to make sure that their investment is going to pay off in the near term as well.
Okay, let's have some more questions or comments. Yes, there's a gentleman at the back there.
We experimented this in Delhi University something like 3 to 4 years back.
I'm sorry, I apologize, I don't know who you are. Could you just help me out?
Pardon?
What's your name, sir?
My name is Chandrasekhar Dubey. I am professor in Delhi University.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, we did a program whereby we did it, okay, first year, you can go out. Second year, if you want to have skills, you can go out. Third year, but the problem came up. The government didn't agree to that.
Yeah.
So what you will do at that time? Please tell me.
No, look, like I said, I think that the brakes on this are primarily regulatory from the perspective. I mentioned professional associations and licensure and so forth, and obviously, government, and in many countries, government decides what is a valid credential by determining what credentials are required to work in the public sector. So that will be a huge break on this, but I think to the detriment of students, because there will be countries that are going to have a more competitive workforce as they develop a more diversified set of credentials.
And to that, in the UK, as of April, all employers with a payroll of over £3 million sterling will have to pay 1% of their payroll as a levy to fund apprenticeships.
Yeah.
and apprenticeships are being reformed so that you can have degree and postgraduate degree level apprenticeships. So that's starting to develop a whole new channel that may or may not include universities, and government, central government, are now employing people who don't have degrees into civil service jobs with a view to developing them themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Singapore, for example, is a great example. I think the government in Singapore, from what I understand, has taken the position that we have too many graduates with undifferentiated bachelor's degrees and we need more diversified credentials, and are trying to actively encourage parents to push students into post-secondary programs that might not be viewed as the most respectable programs, but from the perspective of of economic competitiveness are definitely more valuable to the nation.
Okay, some more. Does anyone put your hands? Oh, okay, gentleman there.
Hello, I'm Axel Schoenmerich. I'm rector of Ruhr University in Bochum, Germany. And I have a question. There is something that I was missing during the last 2 days, which is some thoughts about differentiation in the higher education system. And much of what you presented today reminded me of things that in Germany we used to teach at the universities of applied science. You referred to vocational training things. Isn't this sort of the unbundling, even though I like the term, and I think it's actually a trend that we have to pay much more attention to, at the same time, it could be that under that term, we're mixing up concepts. If you talk about world-class universities and the public good, which is the theme of this conference, I'm not sure whether we shouldn't have an extra session on the differentiation of higher education system and then talk about unbundling as a specific aspect of that. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
No, I agree. I think that look, and there are going to be world-class universities that, as I said, remain untouched by this trend for the foreseeable future. Ultimately, though, what's going to move universities is when enrollment patterns begin to change, and when they realize that they're not getting the cream of the crop that they once got, because the cream of the crop are going into credentials that appear to have a better value proposition or stronger return on investment for them.
And if you're right, and we see fewer degrees because they're being unbundled, yeah, is that a public good? At the end of the day, the biggest problem we have is that we're unable to measure what that public good is. Okay. And I think when I talk about data and data science and algorithmic filtering and hiring and so forth, that's really all towards trying to measure candidate fit, competencies, and ultimately what the return on investment is. I'd like to say, I'm often asked, does this mean the death of the humanities and the liberal arts? And my response to that is, no, I don't think so. I think that the humanities and liberal arts are almost certainly the best way to prepare students with those capabilities that are higher order executive function skills, those competencies that apply across professions, across careers, that really are most determinative of success across professions. The problem is, it's likely that half of what we do in the liberal arts and humanities is extremely critical and productive for those outputs, and half are not, and we just don't know which half is which. So, ultimately, moving to a language of competencies and deriving competency data along the way from assessments, from e-portfolios, micro-credentials, and the like, will allow us, will begin to give us that data to help us figure it out and fundamentally improve our programs. Final question, because we're pretty much out of time, unless there's any, yes, certainly, I would prefer to take that from the audience.
Taylor from Queen Mary University in London.
Okay.
We recognise the model of competencies because it's something that applies to our students, but I was sitting, reflecting and thinking about my own learning experience and actually just the joy of learning for learning's sake. And I was wondering where that fitted into the model.
Yeah, I think that it was a lot easier to talk about that in this country 20, 30 years ago when a bachelor's degree did not cost $200,000. So It strikes me as a luxury that many people can't afford, unfortunately. I think those who can't afford it will continue to view higher education in that way. But in this country, at least, 90% of people aren't in that bucket.
And I spend a lot of my time focusing on K-12 reform, where what I connect with people around the world is how we can reinvent K-12 schooling around the love of learning. That then may change the demands on higher education to embed that much more squarely, which I'm sure happens in all the institutions here, and create that balance that you're after. Look, I've really enjoyed the discussion. I hope you all have. I'm massively grateful to you, Ryan, for coming along and helping to challenge us and think about some of these things.